All right, on this episode of Bowks Talking Bouts, excited to be talking to an individual set to compete at BKFC 30, and that goes on October the 1st. We've got quite the clash with Harris Stephenson and Kaleb Harris knuckling up and towing the line, and happy to be welcoming Kaleb back onto the show once again. How's the day going so far, man? You all ready for training a bit later?
Yeah, man, I just got back from a little family vacation with the new wife and some friends, and just kind of been chilling around today before I start back my work week this week, and about to head to the gym and get some rounds in before I go work with some kids on some kids kickboxing.
Yeah, it sounds like an awesome day. Sounds like you're getting all the boxes checked off in a sense, and I did want to address that from the top, because I noticed like about a week ago you were posting some Instagram pics, so congratulations on the marriage there, man.
I appreciate that, man. Appreciate that a lot.
What were the celebrations like? It looked like a great time was had by all.
Yeah, it was. You can't help but have big celebration when half your wedding party is nothing but a bunch of fighters and jiu-jitsu competitors.
So there was like a big primal MMA representation there. A lot of people you regularly seen at the gym.
Oh, yeah. I mean, two of our blue belts were two of my groomsmen, and another of our blue belts was one of her bridesmaids. So
that's awesome. A very badass wedding party, it sounds like.
Yeah, it definitely was.
But yeah, I imagine you're quite excited for this one, just in the sense of it presenting a bit of a redemptive opportunity, it being a rematch and all. Harris Stephenson being the first guy you lost to in BKFC. I mean, not like a blowout necessarily, but a split decision all the same. Like, what was the, I guess, temperature when this bout offer kind of came your way? Were you fired up for it? Is that a fair characterization?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm always excited to get a rematch in with anybody that I've fought with before, especially on a split decision loss. I mean, I'm one of the only BKFC fighters that's never been finished, period. If you've beaten me, it's only because you came out by the skin of your teeth, or in the one instance with Jim Allers, a majority draw where one of the judges even ruled that we tied. So, and in that case, I think it was only because in one of the rounds I got dropped, and they probably gave him a 10-8 round that fight. I'm excited to showcase how much I've changed since that first fight.
Yeah, and to that point as well, I mean, like, how do you think, Harris Stephenson has changed since the first fight? Like, obviously, he had that fight with Kenny Lycia where he was finished, but, I mean, he also had back-to-back victories since over Drew Lipton and Melvin Gillard. Like, how do you think he has changed since the first fight, from what you can tell?
Honestly, and I don't mean any disrespect to Harris by this, I haven't, I've cheered for him when he fought Kenny and Melvin, but I didn't really pay much attention because generally on those two nights I was fighting as well, so I wasn't focused on future prospects of fighting. I was focused on that moment. So I've really just been focusing on perfecting my craft this camp instead of really focusing on what he's going to bring to the table.
Yeah, that seems to be like a linear kind of thing with you, just like always trying to grow between the fights in a way that's like very mindful of like the fight IQ and everything like that. Is that something you've always kind of had in the repertoire, like a fairly high fight IQ, or is this something you've kind of honed more over time, just like any like physical tool?
So I can't take credit for it. I've got two phenomenal coaches that they let me have, even on fights that I win, they let me have my victory that night and maybe the next day, but come Monday, they're pointing out everything that I didn't do right or could have done better. And so, I mean, you have no choice unless you just flat out just quit training. You have no choice with us but to get better, whether it's a loss or a win. If it's a loss, you can almost guarantee it that we're going to be talking about it the entire weekend, what we could have done, what we should have done. And, that's always allowed me to come back. And like I tell people all the time, if I was to go to become a Navy SEAL, I wouldn't make it through SEAL training the first go round, but I'd blow it out of the water the second time. Simply because when I hit adversity, I've got that conquering mindset of I'm not going to let this beat me, so I've got to go back and do it just to prove that I'm better than you. So, unfortunately, with the fight game, you can't get an immediate rematch that night or the next day, so you have to wait until the opportunity arises again, and this just happened to be the perfect opportunity. I think Harris had been looking to come back into the BKFC circle, and so I was willing to step up and say, hey, I'm willing to get that rematch.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because it makes sense through the lens of it being a previous opponent you'd faced and, trying to even up the series and all. But yeah, I mean, you're still a good place in like the rankings hierarchy, just being in there at number 3. It seems like there's like a bit of a new kind of dynamic in the division too, just with Luis Palomino now being the champion and everything like that. Like, what do you think of the broader state of the welterweight division in BKFC now kind of at the top where you're at?
It's no different than it's always been when it came to fighting. I'm always in the thickest weight class that there's going to be. And I'm just ready to start knocking names off my checklist.
Yeah, for sure. And then just kind of briefly, touching on the last go around there, I know it wasn't in the, binary of the win-or-loss outcome that you were necessarily looking for there, but like, what do you learn from a fight like that, just fighting for a title and it being like in the home state and everything, and just that, the rematch against Elvin Brito, like what were the big takeaways from that one there?
Honestly, man, we had the perfect game plan and the game plan was working. I just didn't push the plan hard enough. So what I took from there was, in all honesty, I don't need to leave it in the judge's hands anymore, because until we get some concrete explanations on what the judges are looking for, then you're flipping a coin at the end of a fight. And with me and Elvin, that shouldn't have been it. It should have been one of us leaving on the ground, because I knew he would feel the same way if I had won the 2 split decisions. He would feel like he was robbed, and he would feel like, he still needed to fight back. And me and him, he's not off my radar, regardless of the fact that he's no longer champion. He still is one of the fighters that I'm planning on getting my win back from. And, I mean, when it's all said and done, I hope to get a rematch with all 3 of my opponents that I've lost to.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting situation because, I mean, I feel like that could be, facilitated with Elvin Brito. Obviously, you guys have fought twice previously and everything like that, and just, getting ready to fight Harris Stephenson here. So it seems like the rematches are kind of panning out in that regard. But I think Jim Allers is maybe a bit of a wild card there. Like, I feel like I'm not sure what his competitive status is with, BKFC and stuff like that. Is that someone you kind of are eyeballing a bit, or maybe not, because he doesn't have like maybe like the most defined kind of place in BKFC, and as far as like having a fight lined up?
As far as that goes, if Jim kind of, I don't know what the deal is between Jim and BKFC. I don't know if it's a purse issue or just they don't feel like, I couldn't imagine that he doesn't bring views, because I follow him on Instagram. I mean, he has plenty of big a following. So with that being said, eventually I think he'll come back to BKFC. It may be after I reclaim the title, or I claim the title, I should say, from Palomino. But either way, before it's all said and done, I'm sure we'll see me and him back in the squared circle at some point. But if he chooses not to, then there's no hard feelings there. Again, I have nothing but respect to all the guys that I fought. I think in all of my fights, I've only had one guy that talked trash to me, and that was Noah Cutter, and he didn't last more than 2 minutes. So,
yeah, and I guess that's why I was kind of talking about the interesting nature of the welterweight landscape now, because like I feel like if you had an impressive victory here, it could almost put you in proximity to even getting like another crack at the championship. I mean, obviously Wade Johnson is presently number 2 and you're number 3, but is that obviously you're not overlooking this immediate task, but is that in a peripheral way on the radar? Just maybe if you get like a big statement win here, it could position you for another crack at the welterweight title?
I mean, if that's the case, fine. If I've told David Feldman that if I got to work my way back up the ladder from step one, I'll fight 5 guys back to back to get back to that title. I don't know who this Wade Johnson guy is. I would assume that Elvin was number 2 and Palomino was number 1. But I don't see how you can outrank somebody who you either haven't fought or hasn't had nearly as many fights as I have. But, I mean, like I said, I don't really pay attention to the competition until they're standing in front of me, and that's just because it's like trying to talk with your wife about what you want to eat. If you're not hungry, there's no point worrying about what you're going to eat later, and you'll figure it out whenever it's time to eat. So whenever they give me an opponent, that's when I start worrying about that person. Until then, I don't know these guys.
Well, that's fair. I mean, it's not on the immediate radar. Probably best to just focus on like the immediate locked-in task that you have, especially like we said with the built-in history that exists. Like I would think this is a fight of paramount importance. I mean, not that you don't allocate that attention to every fight, but yeah, I feel like you'd be just zeroing in on this next one.
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially with it being about 12 days out, I'm just fine-tuning everything and locked and loaded, and ready to fire.
Yeah, for sure. It's an amazing journey to follow along with. I feel like you always bring it and you're always an exciting fighter out there and everything like that. And yeah, I feel like you just bring like a great amalgamated skill set to it, just with like your past in MMA and stuff like that. Like it always seems like you're trying to find out new aspects of the BKFC skill set, just operating within it. And I feel like that's a thing with a lot of other fighters now too, just talking about, you know, bare knuckle, where there's more of like a fight IQ centric kind of focus to it. Are you noticing that as well?
For sure. It's just like comparing it to BKFC, comparing it to UFC. You go back and look at when Hoist Gracie and them were fighting in the UFC. Those guys would get destroyed by any of their current counterparts in the UFC right now, whether it was the top 10 or not, simply because back then the sport wasn't as evolved. I mean, when you've got guys like Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, you know, all of these greats, they would have dominated if they were at the level they are back in the early 90s in the UFC, because they're so much more evolved. But it's because of those guys that paved the way. I'm one of the originals, but when I fought on the card, you saw a bunch of guys that were just going out there to brawl. And now you're starting to see a lot more clean, technical boxing and MMA style striking in the BKFC ring versus just getting out there and swinging knuckles and hoping that you don't get cut open.
Yeah, and that's well articulated there. Like I feel like we've talked about this in the past too, just you being one of like the real grassroots BKFC talents, just been in the space for a long period of time, and yeah, just that measurable growth between each of the fights there.
I think I lost you there, man.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. Just, I feel like we've talked about that before, just you being one of the grassroots kind of BKFC talents and having that measurable kind of growth between each fights. Like, I remember you were kind of talking about like, oh yeah, I was sitting next to Leonard Garcia and whatever, signing autographs, and you were kind of like, almost like the new kid at the party kind of thing, but I feel like you're very much well established at this juncture.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, at this point, it's just another day at the office for me.
Yeah, definitely comes through in the fluidity and confidence you bring to the table. But yeah, I do want to be mindful of the rest of your schedule today, Kaleb. I appreciate you coming on and giving some great insights as always. But, you know, to the point of your schedule and everything, is there maybe anything you want to add kind of as a parting thought as we're wrapping up here?
First of all, I want to thank my sponsors, Mary Jane's House of Glass, for all your glass apparel that you need. Knockout Canada for always keeping my fight camps funded and helping me get through everything. And Downrange Lifestyle, just for always supporting fellow warriors. Other than that, everybody keep in mind that this month is Suicide Awareness Month, and that just reach out and check on everybody. Even if it's a friend that you think is pretty okay, just reach out and say, hey, man, just letting you know that I'm here if you need anything. Because you never know when somebody might be on the very end of that ledge, and all it takes is a hug or a handshake or just a, hey, how you doing, to pull them back off that ledge for a little while longer.
Yeah, that's an amazing parting thought, and I love how you use your platform for mental health advocacy. Super important to do that, man.
Well, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming on the show, too, as well. I think this will be a great rematch with Harris Stephenson, and one that I think many are excited for on October 1st, BKFC 30. Definitely one of the more intriguing fights on that card. But yeah, thanks so much again for coming on the show, man, and hopefully you have a good rest of your day, and looking forward to checking out the fight, too.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you having me on, man.